Hi there, listener. This is episode 69 of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International, and my name is Ian Willoughby. This time out, it's perhaps the most Prague talkiest edition of Prague Talk, because I literally speak about the city on the streets of the city with Adam Gebrian. Adam is an architecture expert and an absolute font of information and insights when it comes to Prague. And recently he kindly offered to talk to me about some recent property developments in the city. That was after an online discussion that I started about whether the area around the Národní metro station didn't feel more spacious in the past. So we met on the small plaza at the back of the Quadrio Centre that now occupies that location, just metres away from sculptor David Czerny's revolving Kafka head. So this is me talking to Adam Gebrian in central Prague for episode 69 of Prague Talk.
Originally this was fully developed area. It was kind of destroyed because of the metro. And the metro was really like one-story building with only function to get out from the metro. I personally consider that as really bad use of space. I think like it was quite simple that somebody come up with an idea like, okay, there could be a metro station, but it should be integrated within the building, and then there could be building above that. And by the way, if you go to Wenceslas Square, you're gonna see a lot of places where you can get out of metro, which are carved into the historical buildings. And it was possible only because of communist time. Like in capitalism, you would not be allowed to touch somebody's private ownership and to carve out the most, let's say, commercial successful place and turn it into a public use. So it would be independent boxes like in Wenceslas Square, which I think would be a disaster. So in that way, actually, it's pretty nice for public space that it's hidden within the building. Okay, then something is built in here, and it was a long process. And the city planners of Prague set up guidelines, kind of like a map, and they said, okay, you can build something in here, but you need to leave 1/4 open. They said it needs to remain empty as a kind of like publicly accessible place. It's something which is quite unique in Prague because this is privately owned, but it's publicly accessible, which is very normal in London, very normal in New York, but we are not so much used to it. There are just very few places which are like that. For me, this is actually the lowest part of the entire project, because whenever I'm here, I feel like, okay, it's nicely paved, there are trees, somebody, paid some money for this, but it feels like it's an unwanted place. Because like for the business inside, it doesn't bring much. And I always like point out just one single thing, there's no bench. And the reason is that it's not really a public space. This is a work of Jakub Ziegler, of quite a respected architect, who, if you look at his work at the beginning of his career, I think they are amazing. And later on, he decided to do a huge commercially successful building with, I think, pretty good details and quality materials and so on and so on. But they are not my favorites.
One reason I wanted to speak to you was about the issue of Prague, to me at least, in some parts feeling more cramped because of these building projects. Is there a loss when you fill a space like this space? I know it's not filled completely, but it is filled, especially from the other side. It feels to me like this building is kind of looming over me.
Once I did a survey with my students in terms of like the proportion between footprint and the leftover space. And if you go to, let's say, housing blocks of 70s or 80s from communist time, usually the space covered by building is something like 15%, and like 85% is so-called like green space, leftover space, parking, pavements. But these are not my favorite spaces. I don't go. Then we can go just like 200 meters away, really close to like Old Town Square. We do the same survey, and there would be like 70% would be covered by buildings and 30% would be covered by streets. So like the ratio is completely different. But if the spaces are nice, and if the buildings are nice, and if the details are nice, I like it. So I don't think it's so much only about quantity, it's very often about quality. I understand your point, but on the other hand, generally speaking, Prague is low density city. You can really run numbers, and like Prague is 500 square kilometers, 1.3 million people, so it means like 2,600 people per square kilometer. For example, in comparison to Barcelona, is 7 times lower. It's really low. And Prague is generous in terms of parks, green spaces, open spaces. By the way, it's interesting for somebody, for example, from Los Angeles. There's a rule in Prague that hills are green. We don't build on hills. If there's a building on a hill, usually it's a national monument, it's a lookout tower. Just imagine the edge of Letna. Any developer who would look at the edge of Letna would say, hey, just fully develop that by housing, that would sell for billions, like with the view to the city center. But we don't do this. So we kind of like protect so many nice spaces for not being like able to build over. So in my mind, there is a space for densification, there is a space for new usage, there is a space for building over existing empty spaces, but that must be done very carefully. And very often that doesn't happen. What happens is that it's developed where it's possible, where you can buy it, where you can destroy something from previous years, which I think became a huge issue in Prague, that so many good buildings are being destroyed and replaced by worse ones, not because it was bad buildings, but because they've been standing in lucrative sites. That's the major reason for replacement. That's a tough topic, but it's related to what you said. The process to getting this building built took like something 15 years, something like that. I think in that process, it probably changed owners 3 times, and it changed its kind of like form or final form a couple of times. And it's not unique, it's rather normal. And in this process, the only way how you can pay for this kind of long process and changes of owners and changes of architects is that the building is bigger and bigger. That's the only way how you pay for it. If the process would be faster, then maybe the buildings could be smaller.
Adam Gebrian also suggested we take a quick look at the front of Quadrio, an extremely busy spot right by the Národní třída tram stop.
You said that you feel like the building is almost falling at you. I think the major reason is that these are cantilevers, so there are no columns. So you kind of like see the full volume being kind of like suspended and almost like really falling. It's like an engineering thing. But I wanted to say that this is actually by far my favorite tram station in Prague. And the reason for that is that it's by far the biggest one. So just look, it's like 80 meters long tram station. You can stand underneath the roof, so you are protected against the rain. And it's actually not a tram station, so it's not a kind of like a ugly designed small thing, which is usually designed in a kind of like minimal way that like if 5 people can stand like this, then it starts raining and then, you know, like your boots are flashed because like there's not enough space for you to move. And in here, you can go anywhere in a way and you are still protected. And like very often what happens in Prague, that even though the smoking is prohibited at tram station, somebody is doing that. But in here, you just go away 20 meters, and the good thing is that you still see, and like if you are standing in here, you can see the tram coming from like 400 meters or 300 meters, so you can slowly move. And in that way, actually, it's pretty generous thing. Technically, it's underneath the building and it's in the space of the building. And I think if they want, they could really fully develop that. So this could be all commercial spaces inside, and it's not. And like the public spaces is extended and it's nicely paved. And I think it's a work of an architect who really think about it. And he said, okay, Spalena is a street which is narrow, it's busy. Okay, let's step back a bit and let's give that public space a bit of a form and enough space. And actually, you know, I really appreciate it.
From Národní třída, it's only a short walk to the bottom of Wenceslas Square, which is currently undergoing a long-planned major overhaul. Adam Gebrian broadly welcomes the changes, which include considerable pedestrianisation, but still has reservations.
If I remember correctly, the competition has been held, I think, in 2005. So it's like 18 years ago, which I think it's just incredible how long it takes, because there was a lot of fight between Prague 1 and Prague and no agreement about so many things. So now it started. I always considered the project as kind of like okay, and by okay I mean I considered that the designers Jakub Zieler and his team kind of like tried to put an effort in creating something simple, quality materials, nice design, but something which doesn't bring a lot of attention to it, because it's surrounded by nicer buildings and beautiful buildings, and you should not look at the ground but rather about like what you are surrounded by and what's happening around you. And once the process started, it always came to my mind that I think like some people would come later and would say, so it took so long and it was just for this. But on the other hand, I think like, let's say, so-called pedestrianization of this part is okay to me. I'm definitely the fan of tram being put back into the middle of the square, and not only to the higher part but to the entire square, and then turning into an apsikopia. I would be perfectly fine with that. But there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that the role of Wenceslas Square is very different than its role from 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 70s and 80s.
It's amazing to me the idea that people, Prague residents, used to come here for entertainment.
Yeah, and that's gone. It's a long story, but to simply put, this was a place for cinemas, for bars, for cafes, for restaurants, for theaters, for people who worked in culture, mainly newspapers, publishing houses, and they all disappeared after 1990, and this became a shopping mall of cheap clothes. Once I walked behind two Americans, and one of them, she was saying, wow, this is great, this is shopping mall, but outdoors. And this is a fair assessment of this place today. So I go here quite often because I like the place, but I think I belong to very few people who like the place.
What about architectural projects here in recent years? Have there been any of any value or interest?
I think it's a sad story. Like, of course, like there's one on the lower corner from 2000 done by Dam and Petr Kočky, which I think is okay. And sometimes I made jokes with people from abroad that there's next to it is Baťa and next to it is Lind, which are two beautiful functionalist buildings from 1926, 27. And I always tell them that even the building from 2000 is from the same period, from 1927, and they take it like normally. They said like, okay. So there are some of these new things that in a way are a bit similar than the things from 20s. In my mind, they are even a bit worse. And then there are some of the infills, which if you look at them as individual things, they are just bad. But because they are part of like 40, 50, 60, 70 others which are good, then you take it. But that's probably what we talk about today the entire day, is that there's a certain history and DNA of quality thing, and once you start to fill it with something which you can call maybe average, and if you keep doing it for long, then you kill the city. And I think like we are in that trajectory in a way.
Are there any new projects coming to this part of the city in the next few years? I know there was this project to renovate the, what's it called, Savarin Palace.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still happening.
It's happening. It's just behind here. Also a long story and long process. It's opening up certain periods, certain parts of the city with connection to Wenceslas Square, to Napsikopie, to Infiska, to Panska. It's actually a huge thing. But with, in my mind, in a way, with a bit similar content to what we see around it. And the major issue, of course, like the huge issue is that there are not so many people living. I know just a couple of people who really live directly on Wenceslas Square, but there are very few. And once there are not like this constant presence of people like calling this a home, then it's just a place for shopping or for short visit. And then sure, like in a way, I'm glad that there's new pavement. There's no height differences between the pavements and the middle. And then there's a new alley of trees, and then there's gonna be probably new benches, and then there's new standards of Prague mobilia, and all this is fine. But that's not the major thing. The major thing is how you feel there, how you use it, like if you are going there like happily, if you really enjoy it. Like Jan Gehl, the famous architect and urban designer from Copenhagen, he said, public space is not a space that you have to go through. Public space is a space that you like to go to, and you go there voluntarily, and you voluntarily spend your time. And last thing for Wenceslas Square, you can see it on the upper part. Somebody told me like it was redesigned in the 70s, in the 80s. Somebody said like, okay, it was redesigned in a way that people would not meet.
It was to stop gatherings.
Kind of like stop gatherings. Like it's like suppress public meetings. And if I'm cynical, then I have to say that in that way, it was very successful design. Because like it was really designed that way that you don't want to spend your time in there. So this hopefully is about to change.
For the final part of our discussion of the changing face of Prague, Adam Gebrian and I walked about a kilometre from the bottom of Wenceslas Square to a spot by Masarykovo Nadraží, or Masaryk Railway Station. It's the site of the most important current development in the city. Named Masaryczka, the project is designed by London's Zaha Hadid architects.
We are at the beginning of the process, kind of, because we see one pretty big building or two buildings being almost finished, but I think it's the beginning of a bigger transformation of the entire area. It's a project of Penta, and they built a building called Florentinum opposite side, so they kind of like concentrate on this area for a while, and not only on this area, but area nearby train stations, this station and major train station or main train station, and also in the Žižkov part around it. And I think their idea is that this should be a place to connect Prague with the airport by the train in the fastest way. So if you are a businessman who comes to Prague by plane and then you got into the speed train and you end up in here, so basically you end up in something which is called Central Business District. And you could see this in so many places around the world. And this was a pretty bad place, or kind of like leftover, rundown place for so many years. So I can easily understand that so many people consider this as an improvement. And I'm pretty sure that when it's going to be done and it's going to be full of people and they're going to use it and they're going to go through it and they're going to use it as a shortcut and probably new entry to the train station, I think it's going to be considered as a pretty good thing. For me, from architectonic point of view, I'm not a big fan, but there's a mistake which has been done way before the design. The mistake is that actually it has one owner, that like one company, one owner could buy huge pieces of plot within the city center, and once that happens, I think there's almost no way how to stop it, that it would result into something like this. In my mind, I think that the city should have tools to be able to subdivide the area into smaller plots and smaller pieces, which would be designed by individual owners and individual architects. That's the way how the city evolved in the entire history.
One thing that strikes me about this project is that some people are going to be working just a few meters from the Magistrala, the through road going through the center of Prague.
I, to be honest, don't have such a huge problem with that, because one thing is that I don't think that Magistrala is there forever. I'm pretty sure that it's gonna get some changes in the future. Like, yeah, it's gonna take a while, but yes. And on the other hand, sure, like it's a busy street, but I think like one of the big problems of it is not only it's big, but it's super ugly. And I've seen streets around the world which are same busy, but they feel way nicer. And I think like something like this could be done. And by the way, there's a lot of projects being done. One of them by Jan Gehl, as a kind of like urbanist from Denmark, who envisioned the changes of the Magistrala. But I think so far there was not a political will and, let's say, braveness to do something about that issue.
Also quite near here, behind or on the other side of the main train station, there are several new buildings around Bulhár. And when the new buildings go up, I think, okay, there was a site. I never even realized that was a potential site. I wonder sometimes, are there few places left in the near center of Prague that can be developed like that?
I think there are many. Yeah, and that's, we would probably almost like need to go one by one. And very often, I think like there's like general blindness towards these places that we almost don't know that they exist. So yeah, just around Magistrala, I could find you probably 50 places that you can build.
Is it only my feeling, or has there been a kind of acceleration of development in Prague in recent years? Or maybe it's because I just live around this area and I notice these particular projects.
To be honest, I don't know the exact numbers, so I would probably need to also just go out of my experience, maybe yes, because like what is typical for Prague is that the, let's say, preparation of projects takes really long, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 15 years. And like very often there are certain kind of like situations like in money or business situation that people start to prepare projects almost like simultaneously, and then they might be on hold simultaneously for a while, and then they are about to build in same time. So they've been maybe in a fridge for a while, and then you see the outcomes, and it's like, okay, they are speeding up, but it's just outcome of, let's say, long preparation. And maybe then afterwards there's another gap of like nothing going on because there's another long preparation.
And how do you think the city or the city authorities are managing the development of Prague?
That's a tough question, and for me it's not easy to answer because also I'm partially employed as in IPR, Institute of Planning and Development. But generally speaking, I think like the role of the city in Prague should be way stronger than it is, at least from what I see around. And like very often I see the role of a city that they almost like follow the private developers, and once the private developers would show them what they are about to do, that they try to kind of like change it a bit, like, you know, put one floor down and add a bit of green and do a bit of more housing. But from my point of view, it's a bit too late. And I think like they should a bit more set up the agenda and be in front or the beginning of the process. But that's a difficult one, and it requires a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of people, and it's not happening.
Final question, Adam. Is Prague getting better or getting worse?
I don't know. You would need to divide into different categories. And you would say in some categories it's getting better. Like if I look at last 20, 30 years, like the amount of effort and money put into refurbishment and saving things, it's actually enormous. So it's a lot of great stuff actually happened. But of course, on the other hand, like we are destroying things which probably should be preserved, and sure, the prices of housing are skyrocketing. Prague is like really almost like front runner in this race, so it's getting like absolutely unaffordable for so many people who should be part of the city and would be required for the city. But on the other hand, I think the city of Prague realized that in the last couple of years started to create their own development agency and start to like prepare new projects and new housing. So at least like they try to kind of like fight that kind of pressure which is external. But just to say and to be in front of you and say it's getting better or it's getting worse, I can't do this.
Many, many thanks indeed to Adam Gebrian for giving me so much of his time to record this special episode of Prague Talk in the Field. This has been episode 69 of this podcast from Radio Prague International, so it goes without saying that there are literally scores more available. Why not check some of them out and, of course, subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But that's all for now. From me, Ian Willoughby, thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.